Commander Zixtal dismissed the junior analyst with a curt nod, pocketing the data crystal. Temporal distortion. That was beyond even the most advanced council technology. He needed to report this to the High Command immediately, but first, he had to review the data himself. In his private quarters, Zixtal inserted the crystal into his personal terminal. The holographic display flickered to life, showing complex energy patterns at the edge of the Sol system. The analyst was right. There were clear signs of chronometric particles, the theoretical byproducts of time manipulation. But that was impossible. Even the ancient Eldari, with their million-year civilization, had only achieved limited temporal observation, never manipulation. A soft chime interrupted his thoughts. His second-in-command, Lieutenant Mira, appeared on the communications screen. "Commander, we've received an update from the Council. The inevitable horizon has launched with Ambassador Kevoran aboard. They estimate arrival at the Sol system in 14 cycles." Zixtal's facial ridges furrowed. 14 cycles? That's too long. We're talking about 4,000 missing crew members. The Council insists on diplomatic protocols, sir. They believe rushing in with a military fleet might provoke whatever caused the disappearances. And if the diplomat disappears too, then what? Zixtal didn't wait for an answer. "Prepare my shuttle. I want to speak with Representative Loom before she leaves the station." The Medusan diplomatic quarters were kept at high humidity and low gravity, conditions that made Zixtal's scales itch. Representative Loom floated in the center of the chamber, her tentacled head pulsing with patterns of blue and green as she processed information from multiple sources simultaneously. "Commander Zixtal." Her telepathic voice resonated directly in his mind. "I sensed you would come. Then you know why I'm here." Zixtal projected his thoughts as clearly as possible, knowing the Medusan could read surface emotions even without direct communication. "You believe sending a single diplomat is insufficient." Loom's tentacles waved in patterns suggesting contemplation. "You wish to accompany the inevitable horizon. I lost 3 fleets, Representative. Good soldiers under my command. I can't just wait here filing reports while they might still be alive." Loom descended slightly, bringing herself to eye level with the Vexari commander. "What do you know of Earth, Commander?" The question caught him off guard. Primitive carbon-based species. Pre-FTL. Still dependent on combustion technology. Tribal conflicts over resources and territory. Those are facts from our observation reports, yes. Loom's bioluminescent patterns shifted to deeper blues. But facts can mislead when incomplete. Have you ever wondered why the Council maintains such extensive quarantine protocols around a seemingly unexceptional world? Zixtal hadn't considered this. Earth's quarantine was more restrictive than for other pre-contact species. No probes within the inner solar system. No surveillance closer than their lunar satellite. No retrieval of specimens for study. "The official record states it's to prevent cultural contamination," he said slowly. "Official records are written by those with the power to decide what others should know." Loom's tentacles curled inward. 3 centuries ago, a Medusan exploration vessel violated the quarantine boundary. They were experiencing drive system failures and needed to make emergency gravitational corrections near Earth's moon. What happened? The ship never returned. But before contact was lost, they transmitted one final message. Loom's voice grew quieter in Zixtal's mind. They reported seeing something impossible, a shadow that moved against the stars themselves. Not a ship, not an energy field. Something that seemed to exist between dimensions. Zixtal felt his twin hearts quicken. That matches the final transmission from the vigilant observer. Yes. Loom's colors pulsed with concern. The Council classified the incident and strengthened the quarantine. Over the centuries, 5 more ships have vanished near Earth. Each disappearance was quietly removed from public records. Why wasn't I informed of this before sending my fleets? Zixtal's scales flared with anger. Politics, Commander. The High Council doesn't like to admit there are things in the galaxy beyond their understanding. especially when those things orbit an insignificant world inhabited by beings who still think they're alone in the universe. Loon floated back upward, her tentacles extending outward in a decision-making pattern. I will speak with the Council. You will accompany Ambassador Kavorin as military liaison. Perhaps it's time we learned what Earth is hiding, or what is hiding Earth. As Zixtal left the diplomatic quarters, his personal communicator vibrated. The message was brief, but sent chills through his body. Analysis complete. Chronometric particles confirm objects removed from our timeline, but with a quantum signature suggesting potential return. Whatever took our ships, Commander, it kept them intact for a reason. Admiral Chen led Kavorin and his small delegation through Sierra 9 Station's curved corridors. The ambassador noted how the humans moved with practiced ease in the artificial gravity, despite reports suggesting they had only achieved orbital habitation within the last 50 years. Another inconsistency to add to his growing list. Your station's design incorporates elements I wouldn't expect from Earth technology, Kavorin observed carefully, noting the strange blue-silver alloy that formed the structural supports. My briefings indicated your species had only recently mastered basic metallurgy in zero-gravity environments. The Admiral smiled thinly. Your briefings were based on what we allowed to be observed. We learned long ago the value of appearing less advanced than we are. Zixtal, who had been silently assessing the station's defensive capabilities, could no longer contain himself. You deliberately missiled the Council. For what purpose? Survival, said the tattooed woman walking beside Chen. She introduced herself as Dr. Sophia Patel, Earth's leading xenoanthropologist. We've studied how the Council typically interacts with developing worlds. The more promising a species appears, the more guidance they receive. We preferred to develop without oversight. The group entered a transparent tube-shaped transport that shot through the exterior of the station, providing a breathtaking view of Earth below. The transport descended rapidly toward the planet, entering the atmosphere at a speed that should have caused significant friction heat, yet the cabin temperature remained constant. Inertial dampening and thermal displacement technology, murmured the Thrix engineer who had accompanied Kavorin, her compound eyes widening. At least 2 centuries beyond what their public development timeline suggests. We've been patient, Admiral Chen said, noticing their reactions. We've had good teachers. The transport touched down on a platform overlooking a sprawling city, Geneva, according to the station indicators. Unlike the chaotic urban centers depicted in Council observation reports, the city appeared meticulously planned, with green spaces interspersed between elegant buildings and efficient transportation arteries. This doesn't match our surveillance data, Zixtal said accusingly. Adaptive camouflage at city scale, explained the elderly man with glowing augmented eyes, who introduced himself as Dr. Elias Cohen, Director of Planetary Security. What your satellites observe is a projection, a carefully constructed image of what we want you to see. The real Earth has evolved somewhat differently. Inside the secure facility beneath the city, the full extent of human deception became apparent. Holographic displays showed energy grids spanning continents, transportation networks that utilized partial phase shifting to avoid congestion, and orbital infrastructure hidden beneath sophisticated cloaking systems. You've been lying to the galaxy for generations, Kavorin said, his voice betraying both amazement and concern. Why reveal yourselves now? Why not simply let the inevitable horizon disappear like the others? Admiral Chen's expression darkened, because time is running out. The shroud is becoming increasingly active, and we can no longer fully predict its behavior. The incident with your previous fleets wasn't our decision. The entity acted independently. Entity. Zixtal's scales ridged with alarm. What entity? Before anyone could answer, a young aide rushed into the room, her face pale. Admiral, we have a situation. The Scourge Collective has just breached the outer defense perimeter. 17 ships, heavy assault configuration. Impossible, Dr. Cohen muttered, accessing a nearby terminal. Our long-range sensors should have detected them hours ago. They're using some kind of phase-shifted approach, the aide explained. By the time we detected them, they were already past Jupiter's orbit. Admiral Chen's demeanor changed instantly, military authority replacing diplomatic courtesy. How did they find us? How did they even know to look here? Kavorin felt a chill of understanding. The missing fleets. The Council has been negotiating with the Scourge for their return, believing they had been captured. The Scourge must have intercepted my transmission about finding your world. Chen activated a communication panel on her wrist. All defense grid operators to battle stations. Civilian shelters activated. Prepare the Nexus for defensive posture. She turned to her guests. Gentlemen, I apologize for the abbreviated tour, but it seems you'll be witnessing our planetary defense system sooner than planned. The room's main display activated, showing the approaching Scourge fleet. Biomechanical ships that resembled predatory sea creatures, their hulls covered with what appeared to be chitinous plates and pulsing veins. They moved with unsettling organic grace, shifting formation to maximize attack potential. Those ships have double the firepower of anything in the Council fleet, Zixtal observed grimly. Whatever defenses you've been hiding, Admiral, I hope they're substantial. Chen exchanged glances with Dr. Cohen, who nodded once. Show them, she ordered. The elderly scientist placed his palm on a crystalline interface panel. Nexus activation sequence initiated. May the Shroud have mercy on us all. The crystalline pillar in Dr. Kapoor's hologram began to pulse with increasing intensity, transitioning from soft blue to deep violet. The scientist manipulated the display to show real-time footage from a submersible drone circling the actual structure, thousands of meters beneath the Atlantic. The Nexus responds to specific brainwave patterns, Dr. Kapoor explained as they watched energy patterns ripple across the alien architecture. We discovered this by accident. The first research team included a woman with an unusual neurological condition, a rare form of synesthesia that allowed her to perceive magnetic fields as visual patterns. When she approached the structure, it reacted to her. You're saying it recognized her brain structure as compatible, Kavorin said slowly, pieces falling into place. That's why the precursors chose Earth. Something about human neurophysiology. Cognitive architecture, Dr. Kapoor corrected. It's not just how our brains are structured physically, but how we process information. The balance between analytical and intuitive thinking, our capacity for abstract conceptualization, while maintaining practical application. The hologram shifted to show brain scans of various species side by side. Human, Eldari, Vexari, Medusan, and several others Kavorin didn't recognize. Most species evolve toward specialization, Admiral Chen explained. The Eldari developed incredible analytical precision at the cost of creative adaptation. Medusans achieved unparalleled telepathic abilities, but struggle with technological innovation. Humans maintained a peculiar balance, what some xenobiologists might consider evolutionary inefficiency. Dr. Cohen touched his glowing augmented eyes. I was part of the second research team. When the Nexus activated fully for the first time, it changed some of us, enhanced certain cognitive functions while diminishing others. My visual cortex was rewired to perceive quantum fluctuations, useful for monitoring the Shroud, somewhat inconvenient for daily life. Zixtal studied the facility with growing unease. Throughout the complex, he noticed humans with similar modifications, subtle alterations to their bodies that suggested communication with or exposure to the alien technology. How many of your people have been changed by this precursor technology? He asked. Less than 1% show measurable alterations, Dr. Kapoor answered. Mostly researchers who work directly with the Nexus. The Shroud seems selective about who it modifies. A low vibration began to rumble through the facility. On the displays, the crystalline pillars pulsing had synchronized with a rhythm that somehow felt familiar to Kavorin, though he couldn't identify why. The defense sequence is initializing, Admiral Chen said, her attention focused on status readouts. The Scourge fleet has entered lunar orbit and is deploying assault formations. Admiral, One of the technicians called out, "We're getting unusual readings from the Nexus. Energy patterns don't match previous activations." Dr. Kapoor moved to the console, his expression shifting from professional calm to concern. "The resonance frequency is much higher than authorized parameters. It's responding to the threat level autonomously." "Can you regulate it?" Chen demanded. "I'm trying, but it's not accepting override commands." The scientist's fingers flew across the interface. It's as if the shroud is making its own threat assessment. Kevorin watched in fascination as the humans worked, noting how they interfaced with the alien technology, not as masters commanding a tool, but as partners in a complex dance. It contradicted everything the Council believed about technological development. Most species either worshipped advanced technology or dominated it. Humans appeared to be co-evolving with theirs. "There's something else you need to understand about the shroud," Dr. Cohen said quietly, drawing Kevorin and Zixtal aside while the others worked. "We believe it's semi-sentient, but that's not precisely accurate. It's more like a fragment of something larger, a splinter of consciousness left by the precursors as both guardian and guide. A fragment of precursor consciousness." Zixtal looked skeptical. "That's impossible. No technology can preserve consciousness after species extinction." Dr. Cohen's augmented eyes pulsed with internal light. "Who said they went extinct?" Before Kevorin could pursue this shocking suggestion, the facility lights dimmed momentarily. On the main display, the Nexus pillar had begun to emit tendrils of dark energy that moved with disturbing purpose, like the appendages of some vast creature awakening from slumber. "It's manifesting," whispered Dr. Kapoor, his voice a mixture of awe and apprehension. "The shroud is taking physical form." Admiral Chen stepped forward, her composed facade cracking slightly. "This is unprecedented. We've never seen manifestation at this scale except in theoretical simulations." The displays showing Earth's orbit revealed the Scourge fleet deploying weapons, their biological vessels pulsing with toxic green energy as they prepared to fire on the planet below. Then something impossible happened. Space itself seemed to fold around them, as if reality were a piece of fabric being manipulated by unseen hands. "What are we seeing?" demanded Zixtal. Dr. Cohen's voice was barely audible. "The true nature of the shroud, not a shield or a weapon, but a bridge between realities. May the cosmos help us all if we've awakened it fully." The command center fell silent as they watched the impossible unfold. The shadow entity, the shroud, continued to manifest, its form defying conventional physics. What had begun as tendrils of dark energy now blossomed into a vast, shifting presence that seemed simultaneously present and absent, visible yet impossible to focus on directly. "The sensors can't categorize it," reported a technician, her voice strained. "It's registering on gravitational, electromagnetic, and quantum fields simultaneously, but with contradictory readings." Kevorin found himself instinctively retreating from the display, though the entity was thousands of kilometers away in orbit. Some primitive part of his ancient brain recognized a predator beyond his comprehension. "It's beautiful," whispered Dr. Kapoor, his eyes wide with wonder despite the danger. The Scourge fleet's initial reaction was to concentrate fire on the manifestation. Streams of corrosive plasma and gravimetric torpedoes lanced toward the shadowy entity, only to freeze mid-trajectory. Space around the weapons distorted, stretching like taffy before snapping back to normal dimensions, minus the Scourge attacks, which had simply ceased to exist. "It's not just deflecting their weapons," General Okonkwo observed, his military training allowing him to analyze even the impossible. "It's removing them from our timeline entirely." The shroud entity expanded, enveloping the nearest Scourge vessel. The ship didn't explode or break apart. It simply faded from view, as if someone were gradually decreasing its opacity until nothing remained. One by one, the same fate befell the entire fleet. "Are they being destroyed?" Zixtal asked, his military mind struggling to categorize what he was witnessing. "No," Dr. Cohen replied, his augmented eyes pulsing rapidly as they processed data beyond normal human perception. They're being transported. The shroud doesn't destroy. It relocates. Those ships and their crews still exist, just elsewhere. The implications struck Kavorin like a physical blow. The missing fleets. They're not destroyed either. Admiral Chen nodded gravely. We believe they exist in a pocket dimension created by the shroud, a place outside conventional spacetime, but still connected to our reality through the nexus. Can they be retrieved? Kavorin demanded, suddenly seeing hope for the thousands of missing crew members. Theoretically, Dr. Kapoor answered cautiously. We've recovered small probes we deliberately allowed the shroud to transport, but we've never attempted to retrieve something as large or complex as a starship with living crew. On the display, the last Scourge vessel vanished. The shadowy entity remained for several moments, its form undulating like cosmic currents before it began to contract. As it diminished, its shape became more defined, vaguely reminiscent of a cephalopod with countless tendrils extending in directions that seemed to bend through hidden dimensions. Its never-maintained form this long after a threat was neutralized. Dr. Cohen noted, rapidly documenting the phenomenon. Something's different this time. The entity continued to contract until it was roughly the size of a small shuttle. Then, to everyone's shock, it began to descend toward Earth. It's coming here, Admiral Chen realized with alarm. Tracking trajectory. It's heading directly for this facility. Security protocols activated automatically. Armored shields slid over the external windows. Defense systems came online, though everyone present knew they would be useless against the entity. Should we evacuate? Asked General Okonkwo. Dr. Kapoor shook his head. There wouldn't be time. And I'm not sure distance would matter to something that can manipulate space-time. The facility's lights flickered as power fluctuations rippled through the systems. On the monitors tracking the entity's approach, they watched it pass effortlessly through the atmosphere without creating sonic booms or thermal signatures. It moved with purpose, ignoring the planetary defense grid's automated targeting. 3 minutes to arrival, reported a technician, her voice remarkably steady given the circumstances. Admiral Chen turned to face their alien visitors. Ambassador Kavorin, Commander Zixtal, I apologize for involving you in this. We've never seen the Shroud act autonomously to this degree. Whatever happens next is uncharted territory for us too. The facility trembled slightly as distant sensor arrays detected the entity's approach. Outside, the sky darkened unnaturally, as if light itself was being selectively absorbed. It's here, Dr. Cohen announced, his augmented eyes fixed on a point above them. The ceiling rippled like the surface of disturbed water. Reality itself seemed to thin as something pressed against it from another dimension. The air grew heavy with potential, charged with energies that made skin tingle and electronic systems surge. It wants something, Dr. Kapoor whispered, stepping forward despite Admiral Chen's gesture to stay back. It's trying to communicate. A tendril of shadow descended from the distorted ceiling, not solid, not gas, but something between states of matter. It reached toward Dr. Kapoor with deliberate intent. Amur, don't. Chen began, but it was too late. The scientist had already raised his hand to meet the cosmic appendage. Loom's recovery room in the Geneva Medical Facility had been modified to accommodate her Medusan physiology. Higher humidity, specialized lighting that avoided wavelengths painful to her species, and gravitational adjustments that allowed her to float comfortably. Even with these accommodations, her tentacles trembled visibly, still suffering aftereffects from the communion. The changes to her neural pathways are unprecedented. Dr. Elena Vasquez, Earth's leading xenoneurologist, explained to the assembled representatives. Her synaptic density has increased by nearly 40%. Brain regions that were previously dormant in Medusan physiology have become highly active. Will she recover? Asked Representative Talix of the silicon-based Huygen Dominion, their crystalline form reflecting the room's subdued lighting and fractured patterns. I'm not damaged, Loom transmitted telepathically, her mental voice somehow richer than before, laden with harmonic undertones that gave her thoughts a multilayered quality. I'm transformed. There's a difference. Admiral Chen approached Loom's hovering form cautiously. Can you tell us what you experienced? What you learned from the shroud? The Medusan's tentacles wove complex patterns in the air as she gathered her thoughts. To the surprise of the assembled aliens, several humans with neural modifications similar to Dr. Cohen's appeared to understand these movements, nodding as if comprehending an unspoken language. The precursors, Loom began, her telepathic voice resonating strangely in their minds. They weren't a single species as we assumed. They were a collective of 5 distinct evolutionary branches that achieved technological singularity simultaneously. Instead of competing, they merged their civilizations completely. She projected mental images into their consciousness. Beams of light, crystal, organic matter, pure energy, and something that defied categorization, all working in perfect harmony across thousands of worlds. At their peak, they spanned 3 spiral arms of the galaxy. Loom continued. They had mastered technologies we cannot begin to comprehend. Dimensional engineering, consciousness transfer, reality manipulation. They seeded compatible life throughout the galaxy, hoping to eventually welcome new species into their collective once they reached appropriate developmental stages. What happened to them? Asked Dr. Kapoor, who had been surprisingly unchanged by his brief contact with the shroud entity, though he now occasionally spoke in languages no one recognized before catching himself. Loom's tentacles stilled momentarily. They encountered the void harvesters. The mental image she projected was so disturbing that several representatives physically recoiled. The harvesters appeared as vast swarms of darkness moving between stars, leaving dead worlds in their wake. Not physically destroyed, but somehow emptied of all consciousness, becoming hollow shells in space. The harvesters don't consume matter or energy, Loom explained. They devour consciousness itself, the organizing principle that separates sentient life from random particles. The precursors fought them for millennia before realizing conventional warfare was useless against such entities. So they created the shroud as a weapon. General Okonkwo asked. Not exactly. Loom's tentacles formed patterns that suggested complex quantum relationships. They realized that to fight something that existed partially outside conventional reality, they would need to evolve beyond physical form themselves. The shroud was created as both a defensive measure and an evolutionary catalyst. The revelation stunned the assembly into silence. Kavorin was the first to grasp the implications. The precursors didn't go extinct, he said slowly. They transcended physical existence. Precisely, Loom confirmed. They evolved beyond matter, beyond time, becoming entities of pure consciousness that could exist in multiple realities simultaneously. The shroud technology was left behind as protection for developing species, particularly those showing potential for similar transcendence. But why Earth specifically? Asked Representative Talix. Humans were barely using stone tools when most council species had already achieved spaceflight. Loom's mental voice took on a tone of wonder. The precursors evaluated thousands of developing species across the galaxy. Earth wasn't chosen for technology or resources. Her tentacles formed a pattern resembling a double helix that slowly transformed into a complex neural network. It was their cognitive architecture, their brains. Dr. Cohen leaned forward intently. What about our brains? Most sentient species evolve along predictable paths, Loom explained. Logic-dominant species like the Taigan develop remarkable analytical abilities, but limited creative adaptation. Intuition-dominant species like mine achieve phenomenal psionic potential, but struggle with technological innovation. Humans maintained a rare equilibrium, equally capable of rigorous logic and intuitive leaps, of understanding concrete reality, while conceptualizing abstract possibilities. You're saying we're special because we're balanced. Admiral Chen seemed skeptical. I'm saying you're unique because you can simultaneously perceive multiple levels of reality without losing your grounding in the physical world. Loom corrected. You can comprehend cosmic truths that would drive other species to madness, yet remain functional enough to apply that understanding practically. The Medusan's tentacles formed a final pattern, a spiraling fractal that somehow conveyed both urgency and hope. The precursors saw in humanity the potential to eventually follow their evolutionary path. The shroud wasn't just left to protect you. It was left to guide you toward your ultimate potential. And according to what I've glimpsed through communion, that evolution may need to happen sooner than anyone anticipated. The revelation that the shroud entity had been subtly guiding human development sent ripples of unease through the gathered representatives. For humans, the idea challenged their most fundamental beliefs about free will and independent evolution. For the alien delegation, it raised disturbing questions about their own development paths. If what you're saying is true, Admiral Chen said carefully, then how much of human history has actually been our own? Our art, our philosophy, our scientific discoveries. How much was genuinely human creativity, and how much was prompted? Loom's tentacles formed a pattern suggesting nuanced complexity. The influence was minimal and indirect, more like creating favorable conditions for certain types of thoughts to emerge naturally. The shroud couldn't implant ideas directly, but it could subtly reinforce neural pathways when humans independently approached concepts that would eventually lead to understanding the technology. Can you be more specific? Dr. Kapoor asked, his scientific curiosity overriding existential concerns. Certain philosophical concepts that appeared independently across multiple human cultures. Interconnectedness, the illusion of time, consciousness as fundamental rather than emergent, artistic movements that explored dimensions beyond conventional perception, scientific inquiries that questioned the nature of reality itself. Loom's mental voice carried a tone of reassurance, but the shroud never created these ideas. It only recognized and subtly encouraged them when they arose naturally from human cognition. Like a gardener providing optimal conditions, but never forcing the plants to grow in specific patterns, Dr. Cohen suggested. An apt metaphor. Loom agreed. Your achievements remain your own. The shroud merely helped create conditions where certain types of thinking could flourish. Kavorin, who had remained thoughtful throughout this exchange, finally spoke. You mentioned these void harvesters are returning. How soon, and what evidence supports this? Loom's colors shifted to deeper blues. During communion, I perceived echoes of their approach, ripples in reality that precede their arrival. The time frame is difficult to translate into linear terms, but her tentacles trembled slightly. Months, perhaps, not years. The assembled representatives erupted in alarmed discussions. Admiral Chen raised her hand for silence. If this threat is real and imminent, we need to verify it independently, she stated firmly. Loom's experience, while compelling, is still subjective. There may be a way, Dr. Kapoor suggested. The shroud showed coordinates for other precursor sites throughout the galaxy. If we could locate and activate even one of these, we might find corroborating evidence, and potentially awaken more entities like the shroud. Representative Talix's crystalline form vibrated with concern. The risk seems excessive. Not necessarily awakening them, Dr. Cohen interjected. Just accessing their stored data. The Nexus contains vast archives we've barely begun to decode. Other sites might hold different pieces of the puzzle. There's something else, Loom transmitted, her mental voice subdued. During communion, I sensed presences, echoes of consciousness within the shroud itself. I believe fragments of precursor awareness still exist within the network, not fully conscious entities, but preservations of knowledge and perspective maintained across millions of years. This revelation silenced the room completely. Are you suggesting the shroud contains actual precursor minds? Kavorin asked carefully. Not complete minds, Loom clarified. More like memory imprints, enough consciousness to maintain the network and guide its evolution, but not independent entities. They sacrificed portions of themselves to ensure the network would remain functional after their transcendence. Dr. Kapoor leaned forward intently. Could we communicate with these consciousness fragments directly? The neural architecture required would be beyond most species, Loom replied. But humans, particularly those already modified by exposure to the Nexus, might establish limited communication. All eyes turned to Dr. Cohen, whose augmented eyes pulsed with internal light. I suspected something like this, he admitted quietly. Since my modification, I've occasionally perceived what seemed like directed thoughts during deep analysis of the Nexus. Not words exactly, but concepts that appeared fully formed in my mind. Admiral Chen looked troubled. Why didn't you report this? Because I couldn't be certain. They weren't simply products of my own altered consciousness, Dr. Cohen replied. And because the ideas themselves were so alien that I struggled to translate them into human concepts. Loom floated closer to Dr. Cohen. What you experienced was real. The precursor fragments recognized your modified neural patterns as potentially compatible and attempted rudimentary communication. Then perhaps, Kavorin suggested carefully, instead of searching for external validation, we should pursue direct communication with these fragments. If void harvesters truly are approaching, no one would know their patterns and capabilities better than the beings who fought them before. Admiral Chen nodded slowly. Dr. Cohen, assemble a team of the most compatible modified researchers. Loom, we'd be grateful for your guidance in establishing protocols for safer communion. As the meeting disbanded to prepare for this unprecedented communication attempt, a junior analyst rushed in with a datapad. Admiral, she said breathlessly, we've detected a spatial anomaly forming near Jupiter's orbit. Something's coming through. Admiral Zenith stood motionless on the observation deck of Earth's orbital command station, her gaze fixed on the planet below. Though Vexeri physiology rarely showed aging, the subtle changes in her scale patterns and the depth of her eye ridges suggested significant time had passed, far more than the 30 standard years since her ship had vanished. It's strange, she said quietly to Commander Zixtel, who could barely hide his shock at seeing his former superior so changed. I spent centuries in the Divide trying to remember exactly what Earth looked like from orbit. My memories never did it justice. Centuries? Zixtal questioned, his voice barely a whisper. Admiral, you disappeared only 30 years ago. Time flows differently there. Zenith turned to face him, her eyes swirling with the same impossible colors as the spatial anomaly that had returned her fleet. What was decades for you was lifetimes for us. The Shroud Realm exists partially outside conventional temporal flow. In the adjacent conference room, representatives from the Council and Earth's leadership struggled to process the implications of the returned fleets. Most disturbing were the changes evident in the crews, not just physical alterations, but fundamental shifts in perception and capability. A Thrix navigator from the science vessel Eternal Inquiry demonstrated her newly acquired ability to perceive probability waves, predicting with perfect accuracy the outcome of several random events generated by skeptical observers. An Eldari physicist who had left as a conventional materialist returned speaking of consciousness as the fundamental property of reality, rather than an emergent phenomenon of complex systems. They've been changed at a fundamental level, Dr. Kapoor observed, monitoring neural readings from volunteering returnees. Their brains show activation patterns I've only seen in humans who've undergone extensive meditation practices or consumed certain consciousness-altering substances, except these changes appear permanent and stable. Admiral Chen approached Admiral Zenith directly. You said the entity was educating you. What exactly were you learning during your time in this divide? Zenith's expression became distant, as if seeing beyond the room. At first, survival. The realm doesn't operate according to physics as we understand it. Thought influences reality directly there. Those who couldn't adapt their thinking perished or went mad. You lost people? Chen asked softly. About 30% in the first subjective year. Zenith's voice remained steady despite the horror of her words. Then we began to understand. The shroud wasn't trying to harm us. It simply exists in a state where physical laws are suggestions rather than requirements. Once we comprehended this, we began to learn. Learn what, exactly? Kavorin pressed. Everything. Zenith gestured expansively. The true nature of reality. The history of the precursors. The emergence and evolution of consciousness throughout the cosmos. But most importantly, we learned about the Void Harvesters, what they are, how they operate, and why they represent an existential threat to all consciousness-based life. She activated a personal device that projected a holographic model unlike anything the observers had seen, a multidimensional representation that seemed to shift and change depending on the viewing angle. The harvesters aren't biological or mechanical entities as we understand such terms, Zenith explained. They're more like sentient voids in the fabric of reality that consume the organizing principle we call consciousness, leaving matter intact but fundamentally empty. Like planets without people, General Okonkwo asked, trying to conceptualize the threat. No, Zenith corrected, like bodies without minds or souls. The physical remains, but the animating consciousness is gone. Imagine entire worlds where every living thing still exists, but has been reduced to empty automata, moving, perhaps even speaking, but with no one home inside. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. How do we fight something like that? Admiral Chen finally asked. Conventional weapons are useless, Zenith replied. They exist partially outside our reality, just like the shroud. The precursors learned this the hard way, losing thousands of worlds before they developed the shroud technology. Then what's our defense? Asked Representative Talix. Admiral Zenith turned to face the assembled leaders, her expression grave yet somehow hopeful. The Shroud Network. The precursors created it not just as a defensive measure, but as an evolutionary catalyst. If fully activated across all its nodes throughout the galaxy, it creates what they called a consciousness firewall, a barrier that prevents the harvesters from accessing our reality. And the missing ships? Kavorin inquired. Why were you returned now, after all this time? Because the harvesters are approaching, Zenith said simply. The Shroud released us to help prepare this galaxy for what's coming. We've seen them, studied them for centuries in the Divide. We know their patterns, their weaknesses, limited though they are. She turned to Admiral Chen with unexpected deference. The precursors chose humanity as the keystone species for the network. Only human neural patterns can fully activate all nodes of the Shroud Network. We've returned to help you fulfill the role you were chosen for, guardians not just of Earth, but of consciousness throughout the galaxy. The combined fleet stretched across Earth's orbital space in a formation that would have been impossible to imagine just 1 year earlier. Ships of every council species flew alongside vessels of human design, many retrofitted with hybrid technologies developed through the unprecedented cooperation between civilizations. At the center of the formation, the newly commissioned Consciousness Vanguard, Earth's first true interstellar flagship, gleamed in the sunlight. On its bridge, Admiral Chen surveyed the tactical display showing not just the 10,000 ships surrounding Earth, but the status of Shroud activation nodes across 23 sectors of the galaxy. Precursor sites discovered through coordinates provided by the returned fleets have been activated one by one over the past months, each requiring teams of specially trained humans with compatible neural patterns. Final activation sequence complete in Sector 17, reported Dr. Kapoor, now serving as Chief Science Officer for the Vanguard. The neural implant at his temple pulsed gently as it helped his mind process multidimensional data from the Shroud Network, all nodes reporting green status. Admiral Chen nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility pressing down on her shoulders. In less than a year, humanity had gone from an isolated species pretending to be less advanced than they were to the central pillar of galactic defense. The transition hadn't been easy. Political factions on Earth had resisted integration with galactic society, while some council species remained deeply suspicious of humanity's sudden importance. Incoming transmission from the Galactic Council, announced the communications officer. Priority Alpha. The holographic display shifted to show Representatives Talix, Loom, and Kavorin, now serving as the triumvirate leadership of the Emergency Coalition government. Admiral Chen, Kavorin began formally. The Council has received your readiness report. The combined defense forces of 87 species now stand ready under Joint Earth Council command. As agreed in the Luna Accords, the Void Harvesters have increased their approach velocity. Loom added, her tentacles forming patterns of urgent concern. Quantum ripples preceding their arrival have been detected by outpost sensors in the Cygnus arm. We estimate first contact in less than 48 standard hours. The Council extends its formal gratitude to Earth and humanity. Representative Talix's crystalline form resonated with solemn tones. Without your unique capabilities and willingness to share the precursor technology, we would be facing this threat divided and unprepared. Admiral Chen acknowledged their words with a slight bow. We all serve consciousness today, representatives. Earth is simply fulfilling the role we were chosen for. As the transmission ended, Shen looked around the bridge at the diverse crew. Humans working alongside members of 12 different species, each contributing unique perspectives and abilities. Commander Zixtal had become her trusted second-in-command, his military experience complementing her strategic thinking. Dr. Cohen and a team of modified humans worked at specially designed interfaces that connected directly to the Shroud network, monitoring its status across the galaxy. Admiral, Dr. Cohen called out suddenly, his augmented eyes pulsing rapidly. I'm detecting unusual activity in the nexus beneath the Atlantic. The Shroud entity appears to be evolving. All attention turned to the central display as it shifted to show the crystalline pillar at the heart of Earth's nexus. The structure was changing, its geometric patterns rearranging into increasingly complex configurations as tendrils of dark energy wove through and around it. What's happening? Chen demanded. I believe, Dr. Cohen replied slowly, it's responding to the full activation of the network. With all nodes online, the fragmented consciousness of the precursors preserved within the system is becoming more coherent. Admiral Zenith, who had joined Earth's Defense Force as a special advisor, stepped forward. This was prophesied in the Divide. The awakening of the network would allow the scattered fragments to reform into a more unified consciousness, not the full return of the precursors, but enough of their wisdom to guide us. The Nexus pillar pulsed with increasing intensity, sending ripples of energy through the global network of Shroud interfaces. Across Earth, humans with modified neural patterns simultaneously reported the same experience, a sense of expanded awareness, as if their individual consciousnesses were being gently connected to something vast and ancient. In orbit, the Shroud entity manifested once more, but differently than before. Instead of the threatening shadow that had consumed the Scourge fleet, it appeared as a luminous network of energy that enveloped the combined fleet in a protective embrace. Within this field, ships reported enhanced sensor capabilities and unprecedented coordination between diverse systems. Admiral Chen felt it too, a subtle expansion of her awareness, as if her mind could suddenly perceive connections previously invisible. She understood with perfect clarity that this was only the beginning of humanity's evolution. The precursors hadn't chosen Earth because humans were perfect guardians, but because they had the potential to become something more, a bridge species between conventional consciousness and whatever transcendent state awaited beyond. As the first tendrils of void darkness appeared at the edge of the solar system, areas where stars seemed to dim and reality itself appeared to thin, Admiral Chen addressed the combined fleet. Her words were simple but carried the weight of the species finally understanding its place in the cosmos. We stand today not as conquerors, not as saviors, but as guardians of a legacy that belongs to all conscious life. Earth never sought to rule the stars, but we will fight alongside you to protect them. The Shroud network fully activated as the Void Harvesters approached, creating a barrier not of matter or energy, but of consciousness itself. The one thing the cosmic predators could neither consume nor comprehend. Consciousness united across species, across planets, across differences that once seemed insurmountable. And at the center of this defense stood humanity, not because they were the strongest or the wisest, but because they could see both the stars and the spaces between them, both the matter and the mind, both what is and what could be.